Hello again, I'm Peter Van Dusen, and you have been listening to the address to the Canadian Parliament from Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko. As you heard, the President says he's determined to steer Ukraine to a future with Europe and away from Russia. And he thanked Canada for its continued support, both in standing up to Russia's aggression and in supporting Ukraine with another $3 million today in humanitarian aid, and by concluding a deal to provide $200 million in loans for economic reforms in Ukraine. Let's bring in three members of Parliament now to talk about Canada's support for Ukraine and today's speech in Parliament. James Bezan is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Defence. He's also a Vice Chair of the Canada-Ukraine Parliamentary Friendship Group. Peggy Nash is a Democrat MP, and she too is a Vice Chair of that same organization. She's been an election observer 4 times in Ukraine, and James Bezan has been one 3 times. And also here with us today is Yvonne Jones from the Liberal Party. Good to see you all.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us. James Bezan, let me start with you if I can. Let's just start with first impressions of the remarks made in the Canadian Parliament today by President Poroshenko.
I think all of us were first of all thrilled to have him in Parliament. And secondly, I think we all saw the very human side of the situation he's dealing with. Incredibly humble man, but one that has a very strong vision of where Ukraine is headed. And as you already mentioned, that they proudly declare that they are European, that they're going to have closer ties with the European Union, as well as express his gratitude to the Government of Canada, to the people of Canada and the Parliament of Canada for our steadfast support.
Peggy Nash, what's your reaction to what you heard from him today?
Well, first of all, my reaction to our reaction, I don't think I've ever seen such an enthusiastic welcome for a foreign head of state.
I think it's the longest standing ovation before he even spoke that I've seen in Parliament.
And looking at it, because we were sitting quite close, is he looked genuinely touched by it. I think he was a little overwhelmed by the reaction, but he
said, "I've never seen this," when he got up to begin his remarks.
I guess he's had some pretty tough audiences in some parts of Ukraine, but he had a very, very warm welcome here, and he seemed deeply appreciative of the support that he has received from Canada, and he spoke afterwards to a gathering outside of Parliament, many from the Ukrainian
which we're going to see
diaspora.
Coming up just in a little bit.
And he reached out to them, so he seemed genuinely enthusiastic and appreciative of the support that he has received so far.
Yvonne, how about your reaction?
Oh, I agree with my colleagues. It was heartfelt gratitude for Canadians for all that we have done in supporting him, his government, and the people of Ukraine. The other thing I really liked about his message today was the hope and optimism that he brought in his words when he talked about future agreements with Canada on trade. You know, he talked about the prospects for Ukraine and vision that he had for the people of that country. And I found that very comforting, because it's not just the here and now. Despite everything that's going on, they're focused on their future and where they want to be as a country, and I thought that was very refreshing.
Mr. Bezan, I'm not sure what goes on, and we're not told what goes on necessarily behind closed doors in those meetings, so I'm not sure what else President Poroshenko may have asked for from Canada, although we do know he's interested in an energy agreement and a trade agreement. But there are a lot of people within the Ukrainian community in this country, and outside Canada as well, pressing governments to provide military weapons to allow Ukraine to defend itself, beyond the sanctions, beyond the humanitarian aid, beyond the economic aid. Is that likely to happen from your government? Is your government considering at all helping to arm Ukraine so that it can protect itself against Russia?
Look, those types of decisions are made at the NATO level, and all NATO allies will work collaboratively with Ukraine in dealing with the aggression. We've already provided the non-kinetic military aid, the bulletproof vests, the helmets,
right.
Things to help them in the field, and especially first aid kits and those medic kits that are so important for those traumatic injuries that occur.
As you know, what Ukraine's looking for is anti-tank systems and that kind of on-the-ground stuff to protect itself.
I'm not going to speculate on whether that was asked or not, state to state, but I can tell you that in discussions that I've seen, it's the continued assistance of the non-kinetic supply, especially as they're moving into winter now. Mm-hmm. And there is outreach to NATO members to provide things like winter dress and things along that nature, and the ability to camp. And, you know, unfortunately, they're looking at a situation where they're going to have to dig in for the winter because of this continued aggression. So he was extremely grateful and thankful, as we heard in his message, for the supplies. I accompanied that first shipment of body armor to Ukraine on a C-17 or on the C-130J Hercules aircraft, and I can tell you that when we got to Kiev, the reception was phenomenal.
Okay, let me bring your colleagues in here. Peggy Nash, should there be a conversation in this country about, or should there be a move in this country to consider arming Ukraine?
Well, I don't know if that has been requested. We certainly supported the shipment of non-kinetic military equipment because you had an army here that was not only small but incredibly ill-equipped. And it's the winters in Ukraine are very severe, and they just didn't have adequate supplies.
Right, but if the ask comes for military weapons, should Canada say yes or no?
Well, I mean, we'll have to see at that time. But you know, I will say there are other things we can do. So, for example, we should be making sure that there are no military exports going to Russia, for example. Mm-hmm. I think there are even tighter sanctions. There's some people that so far have escaped sanctions that I think could probably be drawn in, that some of our allies have included. But I think also, you know, one of the big issues in Ukraine right now is boosting the economy. They're really struggling economically. And there are things that have been recommended that Canada can really help with in terms of energy efficiency and helping rebuild, in addition to ongoing democracy building. We have a number of, for example, interns, young interns in Parliament who've come here from Ukraine, and there are other kinds of institution building things we can do in the short term.
Yvonne, what does the Liberal Party think about the possibility or whether there should be any consideration given to providing, you know, weapons, military weapons to Ukraine? Is it perhaps faces off?
Obviously not a debate we've had. Not aware that the ask have come. If there is pressure being applied in Canada to government to do such a thing, I can only hope that government would act in the best interest of Canadians first, in the best interest of what's good for Ukraine henceforth. So at this stage, I really believe that we have been doing the very best possible job that we can be doing as Canadians at this stage in terms of lending our support, our expertise, our humanitarian aid, helping where help has been warranted. Where we go beyond that obviously has to be a decision of the broader perspective of Parliament of Canada, in my opinion, and I would hope that if such a request comes, that it would come to the floor of the House of Commons so that MPs would have the opportunity to look at that and look at it in the best interest of Canadians as well.
Let me get your responses and observations about you know, some of the content of the speech today, which was, we talked about a pledge from the President to steer Ukraine towards Europe and away from Russia. We also have this agreement this week to provide autonomy to some of the rebel parts of eastern Ukraine. What does this suggest to you, having been there, the two of you at least, in terms of whether this represents a potential for de-escalation, or whether, on the one hand, autonomy perhaps does, but this clear move towards Europe may in fact inflame things? Mr. Bezan?
Poroshenko has really been trying, Peter, to find a solution, to find a way forward for peace and security. The unknown factor in all this, again, is the Russian regime and President Putin. And if they continue to move their troops into Ukrainian territory in the Donbass, if they continue to provide armaments into Luhansk and Donetsk, we'll continue to see this escalation in violence. And so Poroshenko is definitely trying to find that solution, and he's thankful for Canada and the support that we've given. And to go back to some of the comments that Peggy and Yvonne were making is that this is a multifaceted approach. Yes, security of the region, territorial integrity is paramount, but there's the internally displaced people, and the announcement that we made today in supporting Ukraine with more humanitarian assistance and aid will deal with the 200,000 people that have been internally displaced, as well as the 3.9 million that have been affected by this by the violence. And we're going to continue to move that way. The money's flowing on the 200 million will flow very shortly to provide support that economy. And we've just completed the 5th round of free trade talks with Ukraine. So we're going to continue to support the economy, the humanitarian crisis, as well as the non-kinetic support for the military, including training of the military.
Peggy asked you, so do you feel more optimistic or less optimistic with the developments you've seen in Ukraine this week?
Well, I always remain hopeful, but also very cautious, because I think there's a real history of mistrust of the relationship with Russia. And note that even after the elections, there's been skirmishes and fighting. People have had their lives disrupted for more than 6 months now, even since the election. So there's I think a realistic concern about the ongoing relationship with Russia. If you remember, the protests in the Maidan began because of the failure of the previous president to sign the agreement with Europe. And so closer ties to Europe is something that was very much wanted by Ukrainians. I think probably the best place is some kind of balance where they can have good relations with Europe and they turn west, but that they also can have good relations with their neighbor to the east. That may be wishful thinking.
Yvonne, where do you think we are with this conflict now?
I'm feeling more optimistic about it. I'm obviously feeling very hopeful about it. One thing I do see is that the Ukrainian people have become stronger. I'm not seeing the same sense of I guess I'm not seeing the same sense of vulnerability that we might have seen even 6 months ago. It really, in my mind, when I look at what they've done with their agreement with the European Union and so on, it's really showing a confidence in their nation and confidence amongst their people.
And in truth, the process is moving quickly. In relative terms, it is moving quickly towards a different kind of Ukraine.
And this is generational change as well. This is the younger, better educated, more worldly generation that has been able to grow up without a Soviet impact. And that's what we're starting to see. That's what we saw in the Maidan. And that's what we're seeing take effect now.
Parliamentary elections next month. You've been observers before. You may end up going back, all three of you. Perhaps there'll be a dozen parliamentarians. If you do go back, what are we expecting out of those parliamentary elections? What should we be concerned about?
Well, I did ask President Poroshenko today what he was expecting, because there is this metamorphosis happening within their party system. Nobody really knows who belongs to what party anymore. There's new alliances being formed. And my concern is that we're going to see the same type of aggression and corruption at the local levels that we've experienced in the past. I look at the Orange Revolution, how that was set off, and I was concerned that that might be coming. But
it would be a shame. It would be a shame if that's the kind of thing that held back Ukraine's progress.
One thing that President Poroshenko told me that Ukraine's doing this time is that, again, he's going to ensure that the local electoral district boards are elected by themselves. They represent the people of the region. They'll elect their own chairs, and from that standpoint, there won't be any interference coming out of Kiev on it or from the president's office, and he thinks that will set the tone for free and fair elections.
There'll be important elections, Peggy Nash. And you may be there. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. I have been to parliamentary elections in Ukraine in the past, and they're much more complicated. The presidential election, it was really one office that people were voting on. Now it's all of the parliamentarians, and so it gets very complicated because they have a large number of parties and a proportional representation system.
Actually, it's direct and proportional now.
That's right. It's a dual system, and so it's two ballots. if I would hate to see things slide back into a more corrupt result. I think people felt the last election was generally a fair result, and so in that sense, I hope that the progress is going to move forward.
A quick thought, if you want, here, Yvonne, before we say goodbye.
No, I just shared a view of others, and that is that I hope the election will go well, it will be successful. Obviously, we fear that things could disrupt, but hopefully they won't. But I don't know if there's anything we can do as a country to help them avoid that. All we can do is be there to be participants and to support them through the process.
All right. Appreciate all of you coming to speak about this today. An important day, and thanks for taking time to speak with me.